mergers and acquisitions, M&A, is a Microsoft technology problem. When you bring two companies together through M&A, maybe you're divesting companies, the technology stack is often one of the bigger wild cards. And if you don't have a plan for the Microsoft environment day one, you're already behind the eight ball. We have done many of these migrations, and it's changed a lot over the last few years. And a lot of customers end up in a spot where they get partway through and they realize that they planned through maybe the email migration and the file migration. They covered what they thought was the core of the migration, but they'd overlooked identity and endpoint and maybe on-prem infrastructure. And the deeper they got into it, the more they realized that there was pieces they had to address. The other thing we see often is that people get to the end of the process and realize that they didn't plan through license migrations and license terms, because Microsoft has these annual terms now with NCE, and they're stuck paying for extra licenses for longer than they intended to. So we're excited to jump into this with you, really dig through all the wrinkles. I kind of talk through what we've learned over years and years of helping customers with M&A. So let's jump in. Most mid-market companies in the 50 to 3,000 seat range, which is the majority of the customers we work with, are already on Microsoft 365. It's kind of the ubiquitous software. People are running their business out of Microsoft 365. SharePoint, Teams, Exchange, OneDrive, Intune. This is the language. These are the technologies that business runs on these days. And when you bring companies together or you try to separate them, there's a lot of complexities on these technologies. But it's easy to think, oh man, we're just going to migrate in their data and we'll be done. They're both on Microsoft 365. They're using the same tech stack. It's pretty straightforward. We'll figure it out when we get there. But there's a lot of wrinkles that have to be addressed. We need to make sure we do due diligence. Let's go make sure we fully understand. Is identity managed on on-prem Active Directory or in Entra? Are they Intune managed? Do they have single sign-on to third-party applications through Microsoft 365 and Entra? Have you communicated to users the disruption that's going to come with this? There's a lot of wrinkles to go through, a lot of variables to talk through, and we're here to help. We have a lot of experience in this space, and we love doing these migrations, and we've done many, many of them for many customers. Most of them start with Exchange and email migrations. That's where the majority of these migrations start because email is so core to everything we do. And thankfully, email is pretty straightforward for us to migrate. It's a thing we've been doing for over a decade, migrating people from either other Microsoft tenants or Google Workspace, or even on-prem Exchange servers we still bump into from time to time. There's a few things to work through there: mail routing, coexistence, cutover planning. How do people email each other in the interim before you've cut it over? How do we do shared mailboxes and distribution lists? But man, there's a lot of things we can do in this space. There's a lot of really clear guidance and experience on our part. We're pretty good at scoping these projects, talking through the various details, whether it's Gmail to Exchange Online or it's an existing tenant. We know how to work our way through this. Communications to end users is usually the most important and most difficult part. We need to make sure they're aware of the impact to their lives and that they know about the changes and understand what's coming. Also we need to include mobile devices. That's become a big part of how we work. Many employees have a cell phone and a tablet that they've attached to the work environment, whether that's through a full managed device MDM sort of scenario or a managed application mode where you're managing the security of just the Microsoft apps on an endpoint. It's something that has to be evaluated and reconciled. And so, this is a piece that we love working through. We have a lot of workflows on this, and we'd love to help you with this. And for better or worse, it's actually one of the easier parts of the migrations. We'd love to help you with that. We actually do a bit of divestitures as well. When you talk about M&A, usually you're thinking of companies acquiring other companies, but it's not uncommon these days to find companies divesting part of their business. They've cobbled together 3 or 4 companies, and they get a couple years down the road, and they realize one of their divisions has value to another company and maybe no longer aligns with their core focus as a business. And so we also can help with those divestitures. We'll help you pull the correct data out and get it moved into the other tenant, get it moved into maybe a separate business entity. And we're happy to help with those. And Exchange is also one of those areas where we see a lot of that work starting. The next piece is your data. when you buy a company, you've got to really do the prep work on the data side. Is your data in SharePoint? Is it in Teams? Is it in OneDrive? Is it on-prem servers? Is it in another service like a Citrix share file or a Dropbox or a box.com? The first thing in these projects is always to audit where the data is and to decide where it's going to go. There's important things to think about before you jump into that migration. And one of the big things is the migration is a great time to talk about archive policies and data retention. Most businesses these days have years of data, even decades of data. And when you migrate, it's a great opportunity to talk about, hey, do we want to move some of this data into some sort of archive storage? So we start to clean up some of that legacy data. We also find a lot of companies that have years of unstructured data in a file share on a server. And we're seeing more and more companies move away from their on-prem servers, but they tend to still exist because they've been around for forever. They're easy. They're easy to connect to. People know how to use them. But it's actually not hard these days to migrate off of on-prem file shares into SharePoint. Really, real simple projects for us. Again, we're going to have lots of conversations about security, where that data should go, that sort of thing. One of the things we also will push customers on as they prepare for these projects is to put some effort into deciding where what the security profiles look like. Have you thought through your access control list? What are the shares you'd like in an optimum scenario, and who should have access? As we move into an AI-based world, the data retention policies and the access control and data governance mindset really has to be something we invest in as an industry, and a small business industry. We've got to grow in that, and these migrations are a great opportunity to put some effort into that. There's a number of different wrinkles here of, how are we going to manage merging these things into it? We'll probably talk about data loss prevention policy, retention labels, et cetera. And we also want to talk about OneDrive. Many companies still have on-prem servers in addition to file shares. They also have like folder redirection to file shares. So the traditional on-prem Active Directory folder redirection to home folders sort of thing. We can do all of that in a OneDrive and an Intune and an Entra ID join modern architecture. And we can even facilitate the migration to that as part of an M&A motion, and recommend doing that, getting to that more modern scenario where those critical files are being redirected to OneDrive rather than to an on-premise server. The next conversation we often have ties in nicely with what I just mentioned, and that would be around workstation and identity migrations. This is something that often gets overlooked. We think about the data as file data and email data, but the reality is that identity and devices is where so much of business happens now, and has become such a critical part of your security posture. Identity is the battleground now. It used to be viruses and firewalls. Now it's identity. And when you do an M&A moment, it's an opportunity to evaluate what your long-term architecture is going to be from an identity perspective. And I mention that because many small and medium businesses are still running on an on-prem Active Directory environment. They've got domain controllers and servers. And as we talk about M&A, it's a great opportunity to say we're probably going to have to touch every one of your endpoints regardless. We're going to have to work with every one of your users. Is this a chance to drive them to the modern workplace architecture? And the idea behind modern workplace is that your endpoint, your Windows endpoint, your Mac endpoint, they're Entra ID joined. So they're connected to Microsoft's cloud identity management layer, Entra ID, and they no longer are using on-prem Active Directory. Now, you can still have on-prem Active Directory. Maybe you've got line of business apps and servers on-prem that you'd like to keep around. But even when you do have on-prem Active Directory, we recommend that the endpoints are cloud joined only. And then you can set up Entra ID Connect to sync those identities back to on-prem AD. And that allows them to still connect to on-prem servers, but it means that those endpoints are fully managed in the cloud. When you have that set up, you can fully engage all of the amazing capabilities between Entra ID join, Intune management, and Microsoft Autopilot. This allows us to do full end-to-end device management for Windows in the cloud and the fully modern experience. And it's a big upgrade in the management experience and your IT department's ability to manage those endpoints. We've been making a big push across this space, and these M&A moments are a great opportunity. We're going to have to migrate those endpoints to something at some point. It's a great time to build this out. You can still do some scenarios where you can connect up. Maybe you have multiple Active Directory for us. You can connect them up. You can run some VPNs and connect those things together. So we can support that as well. But in general, we see this as a really great opportunity to really leverage that Entra ID join, the single sign-on, the cloud management, the autopilot capability, and a great opportunity to run that. And we do these projects a lot. Let's move you off of the on-prem resources onto the cloud. And then you're also not only able to get those users into the modern environment, but oftentimes you quickly figure out that you don't need all that on-prem resources that you used to have. You don't need those servers. They don't need care and feeding. You can start to move to cloud-only solutions. Maybe you got a line of business app that still needs to live in the cloud. And in those cases, we have an option. And that option would be migrating to the cloud for your on-premise resources. So a lot of times the companies you're acquiring maybe still have some legacy apps, some resources that maybe won't be something you can wind down quickly. Line of business apps, file servers, etc. With the modern Azure infrastructure, we can do Azure migrate projects where we can take your environment and we can literally sync it up to the cloud, replicate it into Azure, and then with the flip of a switch, we have a cutover moment and we start managing those devices in the cloud fully, and those servers are running in Azure. That gives a couple advantages to us. It removes your tie-in to whatever data center or server closet those servers used to be in. You're also no longer responsible for the care and feeding of the hardware, the hard drives, the battery backup, the local internet, the high availability networking equipment. You could turn some of those on-premise locations, if you have them still, into just simpler networking architectures that just allow users to work, to access the internet, to access their cloud services. And then it allows us to take those cloud services, those line of business apps you need around long term, and maybe reduce their footprint, put them on lighter weight servers, make them run really efficiently in the cloud. There's a number of ways we can facilitate access to legacy systems, whether they're on-prem or in the cloud. Two technologies we use on a regular basis for this in the M&A scenarios are Azure Virtual Desktop, Microsoft AVD. This is a remote desktop sort of environment that runs either in the cloud or it can run on-prem in hybrid mode, a brand new announcement from Microsoft in the last 6 months, where we can run AVD in your existing on-prem environment. Really great option for some of these scenarios. The idea is that the users can be working anywhere. They remote into a desktop, and that desktop running Windows 10, Windows 11 can then allow them to access those line of business apps and run maybe the fat clients that those line of business apps need, but still run on a modern cloud-based endpoint. And you don't have to maintain complex VPN infrastructure. The other technology we're using to facilitate access to legacy systems is Microsoft Global Secure Access. Microsoft Global Secure Access has a number of tools, including private internet, private access, and internet access. The idea behind the private access it's an always-on VPN tunnel that runs on your employees' endpoints, and those tunnels then connect on the back end into your legacy environment through the firewalls. And so users anywhere they're at can still access your legacy systems, but they're not launching a VPN. You're not managing certificates or VPN configurations. It's built into Microsoft's operating system. We can put all kinds of great conditional access policies around that on the back end, which allows us to really dial in who can access what. Are they authenticated? Have they MFA'd into these apps? So maybe you have a legacy app, but you want to put MFA in front of it. Global Secure Access gives us the ability to do that. It really allows us to scale access to legacy and on-prem resources, whether they're running in a data center or a server closet or Azure, and give people access from anywhere to those, either through AVD or Global Secure Access. And that's a common scenario we see in these environments. You bought a company, they've got an old quoting tool or an old accounting tool that you need for reference for historical purposes, or maybe the the migration on your ERP is going to be a later phase, and so they need to run out of their current system. This allows us to scale and retain access to legacy systems in a cloud, highly scalable and cost-effective measure. The other thing I like to call out with the global secure access is many times, people are facilitating access to on-prem resources through VPNs that run on your firewalls. And in those environments, what you have is you have a little bit of risk there. We've seen a lot of zero-day cyber attacks that have come against these firewall vendors, and all of them are susceptible to it. Cisco and Palo and SonicWall and Fortinet, you name it, they've all had 0 days, but a lot of their 0 days are tied to the VPN clients for end users. So when we go to something like global secure access, we actually eliminate a set of vulnerabilities because we're no longer relying on those third-party VPNs that are vulnerable to 0-day flaws. And instead, we're running on a purely cloud-based Microsoft managed VPN technology. So there's some real great security monitoring and auditing benefits that come from migrating to these technologies. The next topic we'll bring up is that the licensing is something that catches people off guard with M&A. You work on integrating these companies, man, we're going to save all this money, but you're not necessarily paying attention to the fact that during the migration, you might have 2 licenses on each tenant, that there's renewal dates. That's one thing that can really catch you off guard is if you miss a renewal window on Microsoft licenses, there's a 12-month window on those. So you have to really map that out as soon as possible, really understand the licenses you have, the licenses you need for the migration, the licenses you want to use after the migration, and how you consolidate that. There are opportunities with Microsoft to actually move licenses when we can go equivalent to equivalent as part of an M&A. We have to run this through Microsoft support. It's subject to approval, but we do have opportunities to say, hey, I had 500 seats of this license over here. I'm moving them to this tenant. Can you sunset the agreement on the old tenant and allow me, if I add them in the new tenant, Microsoft will go confirm that those numbers are happening and allow you to do that. But it's important that we play in that conversation. We get in front of Microsoft ahead of time to talk through that, to make sure they're aligned with what's happening. They've approved it. And that can be one of the ways we can eliminate some of the duplicate billing. Another way we can do is we can be careful about the licenses we migrate over. If you're running an E3 or an E5 or a business premium license, that's the appropriate license for a knowledge worker. It's got all the security and productivity capabilities we need. But during the data migration, we may not need that much licensing on the destination tenant until the user moves over when we're just syncing data. So there's ways we can work through using a lighter weight license that allows us to stage the data in the tenant, schedule a cutover date, and we upgrade the end user to their full license in the new tenant, and they're off to the races. So it's a really great opportunity to really get ahead of some cost savings, some runaway costs across the 2 tenants. We also can work through maybe some of the legacy licenses you're on. Are you on SPLA or MPSA, or you've got old volume license, open license setups? Maybe you're not leveraging some of those newer licensing capabilities. Really gives us an opportunity to put you on the best licenses, really clean up some of those opportunities, and drive some efficiencies across your business. The final place we often see a real upside for customers is around Azure consolidation. A lot of times companies have multiple Azure subscriptions. They're merging into another company with multiple Azure subscriptions. Billing can be complex. Cost management can be difficult, especially if you have legacy resources in Azure that maybe were built by previous IT departments that are no longer around to kind of explain the resources that are there. It's a really great opportunity when we're doing mergers and acquisitions and we're talking about Azure to go through and do a review of the resources you have in Azure. How is it billed? Is it under a direct bill, pay as you go? Is it under an EA? Is it under a CSP? Have you done a cost management review to identify waste, idle resources, oversized VMs? Are you leveraging the tools we have, including reserved instances and Azure Hybrid Benefit for cost savings? Those can have a dramatic impact on your costs Have you thought about looking at governance and tagging so that we can really bill according to a tag? And then how do we migrate and consolidate those subscriptions into maybe one bill or the other thing that happens is people have multiple subscriptions. They'd like to migrate them under one tenant so they can be managed by the same IT team, but they want to build them separately. So they want to get nuanced in how they're building. We can support all of those. The scenarios we often run into on Azure for M&A include Azure migrate assessments about migrating from on-prem. We review SQL Server scenarios around licensing and managed instance and AHub. Windows Server, where's your servers? Are they running on-prem? How are they licensed? And then backup and disaster recovery considerations. Are you using Azure Backup? Are you using Azure Site Recovery? Do you want to use a third-party backup? And the backup's a great comment to bring in on the Microsoft side. One of the other things we can do is we can run some of our third-party backups on your Microsoft tenant before we migrate them. And that creates a nice piece of peace in mind. You know that you could start to in that tenant, sunset that tenant, start to clean things up, delete things, because you have a third-party backup that has a full backup of the data. And if you find out you're missing something, we can go to that backup based on retention and recover that data at a later date. So there's a lot of opportunities here to optimize and manage costs and solutions on that side. Putting it all together, what's the opportunity? If you're involved in M&A, pays to bring in a partner like us early on. Let us look at the scenario. I know there's usually a lot of NDAs around pre-sales and when we're still in the LOI sort of stage of a deal. But the earlier you bring us in, the more help we can provide. We can talk you through the variables we need to analyze so that we can help you do your due diligence, help you understand what you're buying for the ink dries. Make sure we have a really good plan, start identifying risk and pitfalls in the process, start to communicate to your users the impact to them, start scheduling resources and cutover phases. And then we can help with executing those migrations and the post-merger optimizations. This is something we do all the time for our customers. M&A is a common scenario that brings customers to us because we have so much experience in this space. And like always, we love solving Microsoft problems. This is not necessarily a Microsoft problem, but it's a problem that's largely based in the Microsoft space. And we love helping customers navigate these moments. And I hope that if you're going through this, it's something we can help you with as well. So thank you for joining us today on this episode of the Demystifying Microsoft Podcast. I hope it was helpful, and we will talk to you on the next one.